Shea, former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary-General for Emerging Security Challenges and Senior Fellow at the Friends of Europe think tank. Jamie, welcome back. Good to see you. Has the Iran conflict simply exposed a fundamental mismatch, a fundamental misunderstanding in what the United States expects NATO to be and to do?
Jamie, thanks for having me back on. Certainly a fundamental misunderstanding, absolutely, because NATO is a defensive alliance and it protects its members when they experience an unprovoked aggression from outside, which of course is what happened, your viewers will remember, after the 9/11 terrorist attacks back in 2001, when NATO launched a mission which lasted for 20 years alongside the United States in Afghanistan. But of course, NATO is not the 7th Cavalry, if I can use that expression, of the United States, which can be sort of instrumentalized every time the United States conducts a military operation around the world, particularly one where it does not consult NATO in advance, it does not lay down any specific objectives or a plan, it does not in advance ask the NATO member states to provide any kind of capabilities, and it doesn't have a mandate in international law. So NATO seems to be, if you like, the whipping boy on this occasion of President Trump's sort of dissatisfaction with contributions from the Europeans. But if those contributions from the Europeans were so important to the Americans before they launched the operation, then why did they not make a much more concerted and organised attempt to consult NATO allies and get that sort of put in place in advance? All I can add, Jamie, is that since President Trump has come back to office, NATO has done all of the things that Trump has asked NATO to do. Spend more money on defence, give more support to Ukraine, take over various former command positions vacated by the United States. And so NATO is really on the receiving end of a kind of criticism which I feel is completely unjustified and unwarranted on this occasion.
So how serious is Washington, do you think, this time about re-examining its relationship with NATO and NATO itself?
Well, you have to take what President Trump says seriously, even if he does change his mind and sometimes contradicts himself. For example, just back in July, President Trump came to the last NATO summit in The Hague and expressing great satisfaction with NATO and even reasserted America's commitment to defend its European allies and claimed credit, of course, for getting the Europeans to spend 5% of their GDP on defence. So in less than a year, we've now gone, if you like, from one extreme to the other. So yes, you have to take President Trump seriously, but let's hope that cool heads prevail, because clearly it's not in the US interest to withdraw from NATO. The US needs its bases in Europe to protect its power. It needs allies to support it around the world, which they normally do when they're consulted in advance and treated as real partners. And the US has already given NATO a clear plan from now to the end of the decade to rebalance the alliance more 50-50 in terms of what Europeans contribute and what Americans contribute. And I would hope, Jamie, that over the next couple of days we can start to de-escalate all of this. There are things that the Europeans can do to get themselves back in President Trump's good books, more use of those bases in Europe, more help to Ukraine. There's a meeting in London this week to look at reopening the Straits of Hormuz, all of these kind of things that shows that, you know, where they are treated as partners, the Europeans are willing to step up.
Keir Starmer, the UK Prime Minister, has this morning called for closer defence and security ties with Europe. Is this the beginning of a more self-reliant Europe and European security architecture?
Absolutely, and in fact this has been on the books for a long time already, even before President Trump came back for his second term. I mean, it's clear that if the United States would be foolhardy to abandon NATO altogether, that shift which I mentioned towards more European self-reliance has been ongoing for a while. If you look at NATO today, the Europeans are much more visible in Eastern Europe in the day-to-day collective defence than they were during the Cold War, and they accept the need to take more responsibility for Ukraine and step up their efforts. So this has been going on for a long time, but of course it's better done in a calm atmosphere and gradually than in response to a crisis, because President Trump now wants to do something unwise and dramatic, who knows, when it comes to the future US role in NATO. It's best done as a part of a transatlantic partnership than as a result of the US retreating back into isolation.
Jamie, good to see you. Thanks for that. Jamie Shea, former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary General.